So I haven't talked about anime too much on my channel yet, and that's mostly because I'm far less versed in it than in Western works. That's mostly because, for a long time, I always thought, oh, it's full of melodrama, overdone violence, fan service, and weird incestual tendencies. Then I realized, wait a minute, that's exactly like Game of Thrones. And I love melodrama. I love overdone violence. I love fan service. I will ignore that last one. But it did take me a moment to really get into anime. There were a few series I watched before I watched something that really sucked me in. And that series that finally got me hooked for good was, as you should have guessed by now, it's in the title after all, Angel Beats. Now, before we go any further, there are two big glaring problems with this anime, and they are incredibly evident. The first is tone, and that's actually a symptom of the series' greatest asset. That emerges after asking a single simple question. What is the genre of this series? And the answer to that is everything. You looking for action? Boom! Lots of it. Comedy? Got it in spades. Romance? There is quite a bit. Intrigue? It's sprinkled all over. Music? Have you seen the opening yet? And beyond that, we've got some jams, as well as a good score. Drama? You want some drama? We have got some drama. We've got a lot of drama. I hope you like crying, because I tell you, I cried. I cried a lot. In addition, the tone being so variable is actually something I think adds a lot to the concept of the show, which I will get around to shortly. The second big issue is pacing. The series only has 13 episodes, and it packs a whole lot of stuff into those 13 episodes. But what's really disappointing is that they could have done so much more in more episodes. Like, there's this time skip thing between episode 12 and 13, where apparently tons of stuff happened, but we don't get to see that because we've got 13 episodes, and it's not like 20 or 26. Even if those episodes wouldn't be as densely packed full of goodness as the 13 that we have, fully covering everything that happened may have made the series even better than it already is. Because of how short the series is, lots of character moments seemed rushed and not as set up as they should be, and it makes the series rely on high-impact moments instead of more intricate character interaction. Because of that, nearly all the drama that happens in the series is either between these three or entirely within the character's own situation. It also means there's a number of unanswered questions, but most of those are things that an answer wouldn't really add to the story at all, nor does it really take away from it either. So then, what is this show even about? The not-so-simple answer is vulnerability. Beyond anything else, this show's themes are all about breaking down the walls that people set up for themselves and the hidden battles that everyone is fighting behind the scenes of your own limited perspective. But I'll get into that more later. What is the more simple answer? Well, in keeping tradition with anime stereotypes, Angel Beats is about a high school. Also keeping in tradition with anime's balls-to-the-wall bizarre concepts, it's also in the afterlife where these kids who had died tragically find themselves in limbo, fighting against God in retribution for their experiences in their first lives. They do this by forming the SSS, Shinda Sekai Sensen, loosely translated from Japanese to Afterlife Warfront, sabotaging the reputation of this girl, Angel, in the minds of NPCs who make up the majority of the school. In addition, if they fall too much in line, they are at risk of disappearing for good. Simple enough, right? The concept alone feels like it's incredibly delicate and prone to mistakes. Yes, there are a few of those, but it also allows the main character to get casually run through in the first 5 minutes of screen time. And if sudden, barely provoked impalement isn't a good time, I don't know what is. By the way, I will continuously reference this scene, part because of how good it is, and part because of how well it relates to everything in the show. Beyond that, this world allows the physical and situational humor to go far beyond most other shows because death isn't only used for drama, but very frequently comedy. For example, episode 2 has the gang moving through a whole lot of traps. When there's a falling ceiling, one of them makes the sacrifice to hold it up while the others get out, and he essentially gets a "thanks bud, I owe you one" from the rest of the group. Any other show, this is played for huge drama, a heroic sacrifice of a character and all that. But here it is so casual and mundane, akin to a friend giving you a ride home. Not to mention, one of the greatest scenes I have ever seen put on a screen. After repeatedly failing to make a sufficient distraction, Yuri triggers jets on the bottom of the squad seats, propelling them in slow motion into the ceiling in sequence to the show's closing theme. This is absolutely visionary for a gag in 2010 when the show came out, and still classic today. But that's not to say the violence can't be dramatic as well. It's more that the stakes aren't particularly physical when something happens. It's never about whether someone lives or dies, always about something else. So, the plot, like I said before, is a bit all over the place. Our first episode is about getting us into the world, characters, the group, all that jazz. Follow that up with episode 2 full of gag deaths by traps that they had set themselves, and follow that up with what is essentially a character study of Masami Iwasawa, who then disappears at the end of the episode. This kind of erratic dynamic stays around for most of the show, but lots of important plot points unfold all around this odd adventure, including a German suplex, hypnosis, and spicy tofu. Yes, you heard that correctly, it is a key plot point that one of the characters is seen getting spicy tofu. But beyond this, most of the plot points are just character points and development in them. So much so that talking about the plot outside of the characters is somewhat futile. That means all the spoilery details are buried along with the characters. So... Angel Beats has 3 different kinds of characters. That trichotomy is characters, main characters, and jokes. Now, when I say jokes, that is not an insult, because they fill their roles really well, actually. It was also bound to be this way, with only a handful of characters getting any real depth because of the short length of the show. So, let's start off with... when he's not pushing up his glasses, he's pulling off his shirt. Also, the only person to be totally consumed by shadows and turned into an NPC. A freaking nerd, and that's coming from the guy speaking at length about anime. The SSS's resident edgelord. His defining trait is his lack of defining traits. Yuri's biggest fan. Also, this happens. Otonashi's biggest hater. Anime's weight loss spokesman. There's no joke here, she just isn't interesting. Unless you've read the manga. Look at us, we're in a band. This is lifted straight from MJ's smooth criminal choreo, which I very much appreciate. Also, these are not lines from the dub.
Get chance and luck, don't let me cry! Knocking on heaven's door. Tasty candy!
Beyond those, there are a number of characters with a little bit more character depth to them. They're taken seriously enough to be given some significant screen time, but still less significant than the 3 that really push the narrative forward. Iwasawa is only around for 3 episodes. She's a main character for one of those 3 and barely existed in the other 2. But my god, that one. So Iwasawa is the lead singer of Girls Dead Monster, essentially the diversionary tactics division of the SSS, and a great excuse to have some beats to go along with all the angels. Episode 3 is pretty much all of the depth that we get out of her, but as is the standard, it's touching, tragic, and well executed. And there's a reason she's the first actual character I want to talk about, because her arc is entirely responsible for setting the tone of the series, at least when it's being dramatic. So yeah, this section may as well be titled Episode 3 instead of Iwasawa. The episode starts with Yuri deciding to make the band distract Angel for the rest of the SSS to break into her computer to find secrets and stuff, and Iwasawa has a new song she wants to debut at said concert. Understandably, Yuri dismisses it because it's not distracting enough, but Iwasawa is, again understandably, disappointed. A bit later in the episode, we meet her again, this time with the audience surrogate, Otonashi. She tells him all about the time she was still alive, about her uncomfortable family life with her drunk father, about the inspiration she got from hearing the similar life story of a musician, and how she picked up an old acoustic guitar and learned to play. Despite good grades in school and a high work ethic as a waitress, Iwasawa planned to pursue music professionally until her sudden death by stroke, caused by a head injury sustained from her violent father. At the concert later on, several teacher NPCs burst in, shut it down, and start confiscating instruments, and Iwasawa is not having any of that. In a fit of rage, she breaks free, takes up her guitar, and plays the entirety of the song that was withheld from us earlier. Upon finishing, she disappears, disproving the ideas of the SSS at the time, who thought you disappeared by too closely falling in line with the NPCs. This episode is a critical one because the audience is let in on a little secret that nobody in the SSS has really had a happy life, how they don't get into limbo like this by fulfilling dreams in a healthy existence, and this quickly becomes an important part of the show. In addition, it's also established in the episode that Angel develops her own abilities and stores the code in her computer, similar to the SSS who make their own weapons, and it's one of our first hints that Angel isn't exactly who we've been told she is. And so, despite her relatively brief stay in the show, Iwasawa's short arc gives us the basis of more or less everything to come afterwards. Yui doesn't have a huge deal of depth for most of the run of the show. She's introduced as a Girls Dead Monster fan and an assistant early on, and actually becomes the lead singer after the departure of Iwasawa. Through most of it, she's just the girl with an upbeat attitude and a casual, often violent, flirtationship with Hinata. She does get her own, less in-depth character study similar to Iwasawa in episode 10 though. Unlike Iwasawa, whose passion is incredibly clear, music, Yui's regrets in life are a bit more broad, and a whole lot more numerous. While Iwasawa's past was tragic because she didn't have enough time to do what she really wanted, Yui's is tragic because she never had the chance to do much of anything at all. Paralyzed at age 4, she spent most of her days bedridden watching TV, with a drive to want to do what she saw there. Apparently, that was a whole lot of sports, because her list involves performing a German suplex, much to the dismay of Otonashi, pulling a Maradona and scoring a goal 1v5, and baseball. All of this still doesn't manage to have her disappear. What does is Hinata's pledge that he would marry her in another life. The speech itself is kind of sudden, contributing to the series' nemesis, the pacing issues, but it is heartfelt all the same. Overall, Yui is just alright as a character, but I think her episode, Goodbye Days, is probably the most Angel Beats episode of Angel Beats. That is, if that makes any sense. A bit of a mix of clashing tones with lots of drama and humor, some things coming from far left field, and all of it works alright in the end, despite the rushed conclusion. In addition, it furthers the idea that disappearing is not really a bad thing, just something that one does when they're ready to do so, and content with their journey in this purgatory that they live in. Hinata is the first of 5 characters to actually last until the end of the series. He's also not terribly interesting in my mind. In the manga based on the anime, he's given a bit more depth, but he just doesn't hit as hard dramatically as any of the rest of the main characters. The easiest way to tell this is what is labeled as his big regret, and how he got to the afterlife in the first place. His big regret is not catching a fly ball. Forgive me if I don't think that holds as much weight as a paralyzed 4-year-old. Now, that doesn't mean he's not fun to have on screen. Hinata really is like the older brother of the group, the loyal, encouraging one, and a solid emotional center, and he more than deserves his longevity in the series because drama clearly wasn't what the character was there for. He's much more prone to being the comic relief, especially physically. Remember that scene I showed earlier with the rockets under the chair? It's no coincidence that Hinata is launched by 2 of them. There's also a ton of moments with Yui, as well as the big dramatic moment with her as well, discussed previously. Overall, he's a very welcome character and actually brings some much needed levity to all the tragedy that's so widespread in the series. It's nice to just have a normal guy around without having to make him edgy or heroic. Just a decent guy. When we first meet Naoi, he's unassuming and not even worthy of mention. He blends into the crowd as another student council member alongside Angel. Nothing much happens involving him until Angel is kicked off the student council. Then he reveals that he's a sociopath blending in with the NPCs while being an actual character, replacing Angel as the student council president, then abusing the SSS for kicks after she's out of the way. You know, normal stuff. Because of how he stays in the background for the first few episodes, when he does finally emerge, it seems incredibly rushed, especially because of his near instantaneous redemption as well. It's not that his past backstory isn't compelling, detailing how he was trained to be just a replacement for his late brother with little life of his own. It's just that this is the first time we really see him, and he goes on and on about how he's the god of this world, and yet somehow Otonashi yells some stuff about living life to its fullest with no hint about who Naoi is as a person, and Naoi decides to abandon that idea on the spot. This is something that easily could have been solved by making the series a bit longer to flesh out the character as a villain for a bit before his turn. He's also a hypnotist, used during his time on the student council as well as the SSS, most notably by having Otonashi regain his memory. But it's also used for comedic effect, as is his antagonistic attitude towards most of the SSS. While he's important to the plot because he causes much of the reason behind the bond between Angel and Otonashi, the story would have been much better if we got a little bit more time with him. Now, side characters are good and all, but the incredible majority of what happens in this series revolves around just 3 characters. In fact, these characters and their arcs, those being Yuri Nakamura, Yuuru Otonashi, and Kanade Tachibana, are essentially the entire story. So much so that looking back at the timestamps, you'll notice there is no plot, and that's because that would entirely be overlap with these 3 character arcs. Yuri is the leader of the SSS, and more or less everything you could want out of a leader. Smart, charismatic, and far from afraid to get her own hands dirty. She's also very willing to make necessary sacrifices for the sake of the mission. Considering the lives of her members are a renewable resource, that is not terribly surprising. She's actually the first member of the SSS we see, with a sniper rifle trained on a different young girl, Angel, which is, to be honest, the best introduction we could have asked for. Alongside the previously mentioned stabbing, of course. In the beginning, she acts as a bit of a guide for the newbie, Otonashi, and therefore as a guide to most of the audience as well. Aside from guiding him, she has plenty of her own growing to do. Much of Yuri's character arc is regarding her relationship with Angel. The first significant development comes from learning that Angel is not actually an angel or god or anything of the sort, but actually just another normal girl who managed to wind up there. Despite the clear evidence to the contrary in the end of episode 3, Yuri is convinced for quite a while that Kanade is an opponent, and has been likely as long as they had both been in this limbo state. This persists for a while, up till episode 7, where Yuri allows Kanade to tag along on their fishing trip. Mind you, this is after Naoi was committing gratuitous violence and attempted emotional fraud for kicks, and then had been admitted to the SSS. This distrust lingers for a bit, despite Yuri actually trying to help Kanade with an evil doppelganger situation, and that, again, is something I love. Yuri still doesn't fully trust Kanade, but is more than willing to help her because that's the kind of tough calls you make as the leader. In fact, after all is said and done, Yuri feels responsible for the ordeal that Kanade has been through. Even as adversaries for who knows how long, Yuri feels guilt for Kanade's troubles so shortly after she was made aware of them, and it goes a long way to show how selfless she is, despite her slow-to-change behavior. That selflessness contributes to the peak of Yuri's character arc in episode 12, after the group has been attacked by the nebulous, somewhat vague and undefined shadows that have been attacking SSS members and NPCs alike. After investigating the situation, she finds the source of said shadows. It's revealed that the shadows have been sent because love has made its way into this world, and that could cause this afterlife to become a paradise rivaling heaven. Specifically, it recognizes Yuri's love of her compatriots and Kanade by name. When offered control of these angel player programs to bend them to her own will, Yuri's rejection is the biggest emotional payoff of the entire series. You see, like Naoi, we never find out how Yuri died, but we do find out why she's there. Yuri was the oldest of 4. One day, some men broke into their house with her parents gone and demanded she bring them the valuables, and threatened to kill off her siblings one by one, every 10 minutes that they had to wait. Yuri was still a child, and doesn't know about things like valuables and where they might be stored, and for that crime she was saddled with the guilt of failing to save her family, despite the fact that her parents and law enforcement couldn't help either. Yuri then has spent her time in this purgatory fighting impossible odds, rebelling against an unjust god, at least in her own mind. When she's offered the chance to become that god, she cannot reject it more emphatically, telling the AI to shut it all down, and when met with anything other than instant compliance, she blows the whole machine to pieces. Yuri sticks around until the last episode, where she doesn't do much except disappear before Hinata, which is honestly a crime. But Yuri, while not being the audience surrogate that is Otonashi, nor the center of attention that is Kanade, is the most emotionally resonant character for me. She's been fighting against this world that she's been put in for so long, yet when being offered the power to overcome it, she denies it in solidarity for her friends. She's afflicted with the burden of being blindly happy and actively fights against it because she understands that it's not real, it's not hers, and she would rather stay true to her core than remain in such a passive, ordinary existence. She is nothing if not admirable. Otonashi is the character that we follow most often for this crazy ride we've climbed onto. We begin the series with his introduction to the afterlife, so we learn how it works alongside him, and have most of the same questions. In addition, he arrives in this world without memories, which is apparently pretty common. That having been said, it's pretty easy to see him as the character designed to be an audience surrogate. With no memories and a lot of questions, his personality is a lot of what the audience just seems to be experiencing as foreigners to the world. Most of the traits I can discern of his are just pleasant, kind of generic traits. He's nice, he's pretty smart, he's confused about how the SSS operates. While his character isn't too interesting for what he is, it is interesting for what he does. Since the very first moment Otonashi has arrived in the afterlife, he's had a bit of a different point of view as the other members of the SSS. They've all been around for a while and have grown accustomed to this, but Otonashi seems to be the only one who might think this girl's not an agent of God. He also is the first of the SSS to find out that disappearing isn't the worst thing in the world, and actually something to work towards under the right circumstances. Despite this, he still helps the SSS with their missions and is the only one who seems to be able to treat Angel as a person. This is important in episode 4, where one of the biggest obstacles is asking for her name, and it becomes even more important as the series goes on, and it develops into his main character arc. He devotes most of his on-screen time near the middle of the series to investigating Angel, learning about how remarkably non-divine she really is. Another interesting thing about Otonashi is that we learn of his past life at the same time he does, which, for the record, is tragic in case you haven't caught on yet. Otonashi's past we find divided into two parts. The first is him taking part-time jobs, existing but not progressing while looking after his cancer-stricken sister. But even that was something he was casual about, shown by how he would just pick the first thing in the bookstore to give to her every time. As her condition worsened, he resolved to take his sister out into the rest of the world that she had been absent from for so long. She does so with her gratitude, and she dies while still clinging to his back. Sometime later, we find Otonashi having studied to get into medical school, but on the way to his entrance exams, the train that he's in crashes. Everyone's dead or injured with limited resources and no way to the surface, but he takes charge of the survivors to help them live through the traumatic experience. Even in his own final moments, Otonashi finds ways to try and contribute to the well-being of others through filling out his organ donor info with his dying breaths, and the other survivors do likewise. Through the whole of the series, Otonashi's character is defined mostly by how he's willing to help others, specifically Angel, the one who nobody else would really reach out to at the very beginning, and in doing so, he saves all of them. Kanade Tachibana, aka Angel, is the eye of the storm around which everything else circles. I think the show can be split into 3 different parts defined mostly by its portrayal of Kanade. Episodes 1 through 5 largely treat her as an antagonist. Episodes 6 through 9 focus on learning more about her, specifically from Otonashi's point of view, and episodes 10 through 13 focus on her task of getting souls to pass on from this world. She doesn't really fit into boxes too well, because she's not really the big bad, she's not really the love interest, she's kind of something else entirely, and nothing emphasizes that as much as, again, the first scene of the show. She's seen as an enemy and a threat in this world by Yuri, and as a normal girl in a normal world by Otonashi. Then, through reasonable conversation and impalement, but only after Otonashi's asked for it, we learn that she might not be the enemy, but she's definitely a threat. And she might be a normal girl, but this world for sure is not. She's incredibly stoic and calm, showing little emotion and rarely speaking unless spoken to. This is likely part of the reason why it's assumed by the SSS that she's not a normal person. Kanade, however, seems more apt to either ignore the SSS or slowly approach them, seemingly out of a sense of duty. Which it is, by the way. She's the student council president, and once having been removed, she ignores them entirely. We don't get too much detail about her until episode 3, where we learn her abilities are not given from God, but developed using the Angel Player program, the same program used as the Love Failsafe. But even then, that's just the SSS finding information about her. She doesn't get much screen time herself. The next time we get any meaningful character interaction with her is in episode 5, where Yuri decides to test her divinity further by trying to make her fail a test. This provides our first face-to-face interaction of Kanade and Otonashi since the first scene, and it provides the driving force for the rest of the series' plot. After she does fail the test, she's removed from her student council position, and Otonashi treats her to spicy tofu, giving us more time with the two together, both at lunch and in a cell. All of this does a whole lot to humanize Kanade to the viewer, and other events even get Yuri to reach out to her. The SSS even go on a mission to save Kanade from, well, herself. Clones specifically. And shortly thereafter, she reveals she's been trying to help souls move on from this world by relieving them of regrets, which then takes the reins as the primary plot focus. In the final episode of the series, Graduation, we see her for the first time just among friends, and she seems remarkably normal compared to how she did in episode 1. That's all well and good, but there's one reason that stands far beyond all others why this finale is memorable. After Naoi, Yuri, and Hinata disappear, we're left with just Otonashi and Kanade. Otonashi wants Kanade to stay with him, helping souls pass on, and he admits that he loves her, to which Kanade replies with nothing. When pressed further, Kanade says that she'd disappear if she told him her feelings, that in her past life she was the recipient of a heart transplant, and her only regret was not thanking the donor, who is, you guessed it. The show has been building to this ever since the foreshadowing of naming the opening song, My Soul, Your Beats, and Kanade learned Otonashi's heart was missing in that first scene, when she impaled him and recognized the connection instantly. Otonashi, in tears, continues telling Kanade that he loves her, and Kanade, calm as always, responds with, "Thank you," before disappearing, leaving Otonashi alone. Which, needless to say, the emotional pain of is roughly equivalent to ripping your still-beating heart out through your throat. Kanade is odd because she doesn't really change at all through the run of the show, unlike Yuri and Otonashi. Then again, she wasn't really the one who needed changing. The narrative gradually shifts from perceiving Yuri's initial point of view as the right way, to more ambiguity near the middle, to portraying Kanade's view as right. Kanade never really changes, but our perception of her does instead, slowly shifting from alien to friendly. And this is something pretty unique to this show. There's not a single point where you instantly believe her to be normal, but a shift over time, and Kanade does not change at all. It's a unique kind of character development that I really haven't seen done much before. Beyond this, there's a short epilogue-like shot where a girl similar to Kanade is humming Iwasawa's song. A boy similar to Otonashi hesitates while hearing it, then runs after her as she leaves. Something I think is a little bit unneeded. There's also an alternate epilogue with Otonashi staying behind to look after other souls that may have found their way into this world, and beyond even that, 2 full episodes not part of the original run to toy around with. It goes without saying that I recommend it all, but it's not really needed as part of the 13-episode series. Angel Beats is incredible for a number of reasons, but the one that I most appreciate is about how it handles the concept of vulnerability. Throughout much of the series, Yuri and the SSS in association are preoccupied with being strong at the beginning, with fighting their enemy, but the thing is, they cannot die. They are functionally invulnerable. They actively run from disappearing in order to fight more. The only way that anyone at all in this series succeeds in their goals is by opening themselves up, by taking an emotional risk in some way. Whether that's standing up to an organization in defense of the self, or admitting that not everything in your own life was your fault, but it was still yours. Everything meaningful done in this story is an act of vulnerability or solidarity for their friends. The big concerts are explicitly distractions, and the gunfights are essentially pointless. The plot really moves forward for the first time when Iwasawa decides to play a song she wrote, then when Otonashi asks their mysterious foe her name, so on and so forth. Not in this shootout or in this hallway full of traps. A lot of anime has a reputation for being about who's the strongest or smartest, to be the best that no one ever was, or to be the #1 hero, or surpassing power levels, and that is not a bad thing. It's just not a unique thing. In Angel Beats, almost every character carries guns so detailed that you can look up the exact models that they use, so it seems like exactly the kind of thing that would fit nicely into that box. But here, there is so much emphasis on emotions that you sometimes forget they all carry firearms at all. It shows that true strength doesn't have to be in the forms of firepower, muscle, or brains, but can also be in compassion. It's just all these kids dealing with their own various traumas and taking care of each other. Now, as I said before, the show is not perfect. If you watched it and you didn't like it, I get that. A good number of the characters are defined by a single character trait. It blends so many concepts together with gunfights and computer programs and afterlives, and it has episodes where absolutely everything matters and other episodes where they play in a baseball tournament. But for the life of me, I cannot yet find a series that has the power of some of these scenes. Every time I rewatch it, I need to take a good few minutes of just sitting and catching my breath after Yuri destroys the Angel Player programs, and then for a few more after Kanade leaves. Nothing at all is filler, because even the parts that aren't plot necessary are gold in their own way, mainly humor. The ambition of the storytelling is monumental for something with only 13 episodes to its name, essentially telling redemption arcs in quick succession with a whole lot of underlying intrigue. It may have cut some corners, but I have nothing but respect for a series that even attempts this kind of magnitude, and it manages to do so while having more than just fleeting moments of levity. The animation is beautiful, especially in the more grand moments of the show. As mentioned before, the detail in the gun specifically is phenomenal, yet unnecessary, which only makes the effort more admirable. But it doesn't stop there. The opening is gorgeous, even among the ludicrously high standard that is anime openings, and the animation isn't just used to be pretty, but to dictate the tone of any given scene. This series is just stunning, and every time I rewatch it start to finish, it knocks me flat on my back.
I know you've been hurt by someone else. I could tell by the way you carry yourself.
Next time, animals doing their best to succeed in the big city, but are surprised when not everything works as perfectly as was imagined. And hopefully it'll take less than 2 months this time.